preacher, broadcasting from somewhere partially underground on this continent. If you'd like to follow along tonight, turn to Hebrews chapter 10. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 25. Hebrews 10, chapter 10, verse 25. Not forsaking the assembly of ourselves together, as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as ye see the day approaching. Decades ago, longer than I'd like to admit as the mass preacher, I was involved in a church, I guess I'd call it a mega church, and it was there was an athletic league, it was a volleyball league, and you had some people who were serious athletes that had played high school, maybe college sports, and this volleyball was like their Olympics. It was a very serious event. You had other people who were just couch potatoes that just wanted to have fun. And so I was the head of a captain of a team, and we were the couch potatoes. And not so much me, but about everybody else on the team weren't very athletic. And so this one match with this one volleyball team, they were undefeated in the top. And they had some very serious athletes on it. We were on the bottom. And we probably had one person that you would even remotely say had any much talent at all. And I hope my fellow members of that team decades ago won't be offended, but we weren't much to speak of. And I remember this one match, we were ahead, and I could not believe it. And I'm just going from player to player, we're ahead, and other people were kind of watching, and there was an excitement, and this one match had taken on a life of its own. And now these serious contenders, their record was threatened, and we actually might win one. And they had a rule, because there were so many teams in this volleyball tournament, there was a time limit. Each match had a half hour, or whatever the amount was. And I was trying to think of ways to stall because we had the lead. So I would hit it out of bounds. I was doing things. And I was telling players, you know, hit it on the roof so they have to go chase the ball. I wanted so desperately to pull the upset. And you know, we just couldn't figure out ways enough to stall. And we ended up losing it, but we gave them a game. Not long after this, you know, I began to realize what friends had developed from this team. And though maybe, you know, in my competitive mode, maybe I wouldn't have picked these people, but it was relationships that even some of these people today, decades later, I am friends. We talk and visit. We've developed relationships. And in this church, there were a lot of relationships developed. I didn't like some of the things that went on there at the time, but as I look back now, it was actually one of the best churches I had ever gone to for a number of reasons. But what I'm getting to here, and with Hebrews 10:25, is this gathering together. It's like a family, and there are cases where there are abuses in family where you need to leave and separate the kids from the parents. But there's also a big block of relationships within this family context that are some on the better, some not so good. But there's good things within this big block. There's good things within all these things. God develops character in you through all these experiences. There's a volleyball team that I talked about was maybe not my choosing, how it all came out, but there were relationships developed that never would have otherwise. The phrase, not forsaking the assembly of yourselves together. God has put us together We all have emotional needs, human needs, and there's something about that process of being put together. If you're at a job and you've got to work with different people, you've got to know when to speak out and learn when to not. You go to a church and, maybe they don't do everything right. Maybe they, teach the Bible good, but they don't have much excitement. And maybe they got too much excitement and not enough Bible. And you really need to have God deal with you about what church. And it's hard, quote, picking a church. There's books out there about doing that. But you need to just, pray and ask the Lord where you're at, saying, Lord, this is the level of life where I'm at. Help me, lead me to a church. I know when I first was a believer, there was someone I grew up with in the neighborhood. He was older than me, and he took me to church quite often. And I probably wouldn't have gone if it wasn't for him taking me. And I learned some good things. I learned some bad things. But that was part of the assembling of together. And it's just like a family. I grew up with brothers now. There were things that my physical family used to make me mad. And now I look back and just realize it wasn't that big of a deal. There's what I call a spiritual warmth. And where the world headquarters of the Mass Preacher is, it can get kind of cold here. Matter of fact, we had one of our coldest winters in a long time. And you need a place to go and get warm. And going to church helps you to hopefully hear a good sermon and be with other believers, and to take a time one day a week and just set it outside your life to fellowship with other believers, and you could see that, there's other people serving God. As you're on your job, you kind of wonder, you may feel like, wow, am I the only Christian in the world? And there's nobody here serving God. But going to a church and going to different Christian events, you realize, that's not really true, because there are a lot of believers around. But you don't know that unless you're in a place where you can have fellowship with other believers. Another practical, simple thing is you stop thinking about yourself. You look at somebody, a child, maybe an only child in a home, and I'm not giving them a bad rap, and because it depends on the relationship with the parents and what their social life is like and things. But as you live with other brothers and sisters and siblings, you learn how to give and how to take, and I got to put up with that. And you also realize they put up with you on things. And that is part of the family relationship. Another phrase in this verse, as the manner of some is. Some people receive Christ as Savior, yet they don't find a spiritual family to be a part of. And the writer here is saying he doesn't want you to be like that. Another point, but exhorting one another so much more as you see the day approaching. As we get closer to the return of Christ and the rapture of the church, things are going to get harder and harder. And we're going to need help. We're going to need instruction in this process. And we're going to also need to be available to encourage other people. We may have an area of our life that we've never thought about, but just the simple act of going to a church and we sit next to somebody, I can't tell you how many times over the years I've sat down by somebody and I had a word. And maybe they didn't want to receive that word, but I was sent by the Lord to give instruction on a certain area in their life. I didn't know that at the time, But maybe I was visiting a church or in a church I was going to, and I sat by someone who maybe I usually didn't, and God was using me to minister to other people. And that's one of the reasons why we need to do this. Well, when we sing and we worship, we hear God, we become encouraged. And so, in closing, I just want to encourage all the people, especially the new believers in the Lord, and maybe the backsliders who have left the church. And sometimes it gets kind of frustrating, and sometimes there's ideas that come through the Christian community that frustrate me. But what we have to do is say, Lord, where do you want me to be a part of, and to learn the lessons I need, and to help with that body where I'm going to, where I can use my gifts. And God bless you. Signing off from somewhere partially underground, the Masked Preacher bids you good night.